In Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, a young girl travels to a planet far, far away to save her father. As a child, I could not help but imagine myself as Meg, visiting all those incredibly crazy places, and wonder what it would be like to feel the wrinkling and warping of time, something that only ever seemed to happen in our wildest fantasies. Everywhere, we are surrounded by all these rigid mechanisms that tick forward at a steady pace, never missing a second and never changing their rate, assuming they're working properly. Society is organized around the clock, and everything is run on a schedule. But time has another aspect to it, and it is the subjective way in which we experience it. The truth is that time is constantly twisting and bending for us, if modern idioms are any proof. It flies when we're having fun, and it drags when we're bored. Sometimes it's on our side, but otherwise it races against us. From these everyday sayings, it's clear that while clocks are mechanical, we are not. For decades, time perception has been conceptualized as a model of an internal biological stopwatch in the brain that slows and accelerates based on attention and excitement. From empirical studies that observed correlations between interval misjudgments and emotions, to neuroscientific research that looked at specific chemical messengers in the brain, there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that points to the fluidity of time. Time has been closely linked with emotions such as fear and joy. Starting with joy, numerous studies have strived to explain why time seems to fly when we're having fun. In December 2016, a group of researchers from Portugal led by Sofia Soares showed that increased dopamine may cause our internal sense of time to slow down. So what does that mean? First off, dopamine is a chemical messenger in your brain that makes you feel happy, and its release is boosted by unexpectedly enjoyable events. Secondly, what do they mean when they say that our internal sense of time slows down? I'll give you an example. Let's say you're at a party with your friends and you have to be home by midnight. You look at your phone, it's 10 p.m. So you have about 2 hours left and continue partying, enjoying yourself while dopamine is firing off in your brain. After what you feel has been 2 hours, you look at your phone to find 5 missed calls and 13 text messages. It's 1 in the morning. So how did time fly? What would have happened is that your internal sense of time, which had recorded 2 hours having elapsed, had been running slower than the external clock, which had recorded 3 hours. A slowing down of your internal sense of time makes the external clock appear to be moving much faster. So back to the actual study. Mice were trained to classify the interval between 2 tones as longer or shorter than 1.5 seconds. Using fiber photometry, which is an imaging method that uses calcium to monitor neural activity, the researchers measured the activity of dopamine neurons in the substantia nigra pars compacta, which is a section in the middle of the brain that we also have. They found the dopamine activity to be varied, but correlated with the animal's perception of time. Specifically, when dopamine activity was high, the animals were more likely to judge the interval as shorter than 1.5 seconds. And when dopamine activity was low, the animals were more likely to judge the interval as longer. This is a very interesting correlation, but sometimes correlations are only superficial. So the researchers took it a step further and performed a second set of experiments in which those neurons were either stimulated or inhibited. The results were unambiguous. Stimulation led to underestimation, while inhibition led to overestimation. With these 2 sets of data, what this team really showed was that dopamine, the chemical messenger in our brain that makes us feel happy, can affect our perception of time. They provide a possible explanation for the idiom of time flying when we're having fun, and it is linked back to dopamine. Whether dopamine release is boosted by artificial stimulation or by having a little too much fun, its release causes us to underestimate time by slowing down our internal stopwatch. this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are many other emotions that affect our time perception, such as fear. Fear has been extensively examined, and one of the most well-known studies was carried out in 2007 and led by David Eagleman, an American neuroscientist. Although the primary goal was to investigate if time slowed down as a single unit, their data also showed a very interesting connection between fear, memories, and our time perception. In their experiment, participants were harnessed to a platform 50 meters above the ground. Then they were released, free-falling for 2.49 seconds before landing safely in a net. Before taking the free fall, some of them were asked to watch a fellow participant take the free fall, and then they were asked to imagine themselves falling, starting a stopwatch when they were released and stopping it when they felt they hit the net. Then after taking the frightening fall, they were asked to recreate it in their minds, starting and stopping a stopwatch when they were released and when they hit the net. What the researchers found was that on average, their duration estimates after taking the fall were 36% greater than their estimates for the fall of others, as shown by this graph that comes from Eagleman's paper. So why is it that the participants experienced eye dilation in their time perception after taking the frightening fall, even though everyone was free-falling for the same amount of time? One possible explanation offered by this team is that time and memory are closely linked. In critical situations, such as free-falling from 50 meters in the air, the amygdala takes control of the entire brain, commanding all the resources to attend to the situation at hand. The amygdala is known for regulating the fight or flight response, but it's also involved in forming memories that are more vivid and enduring. So what likely happened is that when those participants were falling, their amygdala likely registered it as a critical situation and began creating more memories that are more vivid. Retrospectively then, when those participants recreated the fall in their head, the higher density of memories would have made the event feel longer. Memories act as milestones for our perception of time and proof of the past that we experienced. Therefore, the more memories we have, the longer our perception of time. With these two studies in mind, knowing that dopamine can cause us to underestimate time and that more memories makes an event feel longer, it begs the question of how do we experience time? Because it's not in sync with the clock on the wall. It isn't programmed at a fixed rate. It's not a river that flows steadily forward, but rather it's a stream that is constantly jostled and swirled. It is influenced by emotions such as joy and fear, and ultimately, our perception of time is just a construct of our brain. Unfortunately for us, the clock on the wall is not going away. Society has become so reliant on it that it would likely just fall apart. Imagine if everyone went to school or work when they felt that it was time, or if everyone came home from vacation when they felt like the time was right. You would probably not see them again for a very long time. However, even though the clock on the wall will continue to dictate our schedules, it does not mean that we should let it limit our enjoyment of the time that we have. I had an unforgettable experience when I went to Europe for the first time this April. I threw coins in the Trevi fountain, and I had gelato in Rome while walking outside in the rain without an umbrella. And even though the trip was 13 days long, it certainly felt much shorter than the typical 13 days that I experience. Woefully counting down the days left in the trip would not have stretched it out in any way. Similarly, warily counting down the 13-hour layover I had in Toronto would not have made the time go by any faster. In fact, the lack of dopamine from boredom would have only made it seem longer. So instead, I let myself forget about what time it was and viewed the trip more so as a fluid collection of experiences rather than a rigid schedule of activities. That's part of what made it so special to me. Because there's nothing special about a schedule. It's the experience that counts. Appreciating and savoring our fluid perception of time, instead of only acknowledging the clock on the wall and life as a schedule, is part of what makes it worth living. Because deep down, for us, time has never been measured in seconds. It is, and has always been, lived by the moment. Thank you.